You suddenly stopped coming to our town as soon as I told you this news. Have you ever felt the urge to do something that was always on your mind and just let loose? Well, you're letting your mind take control without discipline, and doing what you've always wanted to do. I thought I was making myself feel alive again. I wanted to have that feeling that everyone has of being free again. I wanted to remind myself that you can also let loose. Enjoy your marriage while it lasts. Have you ever told someone you love that you want a future together but with the freedom to explore other connections? That's what happened to me. I opened up about my need for an open relationship, hoping for understanding and acceptance. Instead, he vanished without a trace, leaving me wondering what went wrong. One thing about me is that I always say what I think. I told you what I wanted to know, and I told you straight. I didn't expect him to act the way he did. I thought that if I opened up to him and told him how I felt, he'd understand and we'd sit down and discuss it. Instead, he just packed up and left, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, yes, I loved him, but I don't understand why he acted like that. I think a lot of people, especially women, lose themselves when they get married. Some of them end up regretting it because they can't do the things that made them happy. They become someone they're not, which is really sad. It doesn't feel free when you get married. It takes a lot of courage to share your story, so I only accept advice and not judgments. I'm Veronica Cooper, female 27, and my husband is Mike Andrews, male 37. We first met at a golf club estate. There was a business meeting at the estate while we were playing golf. I was a waitress for the day. I was studying for my master's degree in psychology, so I was doing a side job while I was studying so that I would be able to make ends meet and pay for my studies that day. I was working on the field, making sure the business gurus were well taken care of and had everything they needed. While I was catering for them, I made a mistake. I missed a step, and the drink I was holding fell on one of the businessmen's lap. He shouted at me and called me stupid and other harsh names. I tried apologizing, but he wasn't having it. He was a blazing fire. Mike came to my rescue and spoke with the guy, telling him that I told him it was a mistake and that he'd have to pay for the damage I'd done to the guy's golfing shorts. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked Mike for the rescue. That day was the toughest day in my working history. I felt so belittled, humiliated, embarrassed, and stupid. It's really hard being a waitress because you always have to put a smile on your face. Even if you're not feeling well, or if a customer doesn't like what you've served them, then they call you names and say you're stupid. It's always the waitress's fault when a customer is rude. Some managers fire waitresses for a customer complaint, even though it's not their fault. It's hard to stay calm and smile all the time, but you have to follow the rules and put your feelings aside to keep your job. I kept apologizing to the rude businessman, but Mike told me to stop. I was happy to get away from that arrogant man. Mike came to my workstation later and apologized for how his associate behaved. I helped him clean up the mess I made by spilling orange juice on his white golfing shorts. It was going to cost me almost all my salary, but I knew I had to clean up that man's shorts no matter what. Mike then asked him to give him so that he can call me when we have to go and clean the golfing shorts. I was a bit reluctant at first, as I was only 20 and he was 30 at the time. However, I eventually gave him my number because I figured the guy was going to help me clean the arrogant man's golfing shorts. He called after 2 days, which was pretty quick. At the time, I was wondering how I was going to afford golfing pants, or how I was going to get money to clean them. I met up with Mike at the mall, where the guy had bought new golfing shorts. Since then, we've got on well and we've chatted more through WhatsApp. Mike was a lovely guy who was very sweet, caring, and loving. He liked to think he was a bit cocky, but he was just a breath of fresh air. He was a great friend, a good advisor, and an awesome lunch date partner. 2 months after we met, he told me that he couldn't hold himself anymore and that he needed someone to grow old with. At first, I didn't understand what he was saying until he asked me to be his girlfriend officially. I was just lost for words. I mean, the guy is. He has everything he wants and needs, so why would he want a girlfriend? It was just everything and more. We dated for about 8 months. He took me to meet his parents, who were very welcoming and loving, especially his mother. She was such a sweetheart with a good heart. His sister was just what I needed. She was my age, which was a big plus. I didn't have any friends, so Mike's sister became my best friend. My relationship with Mike was amazing. It was exactly what I'd been praying for. He was like my answered prayers, even though I didn't know that he had anger issues and bipolar disorder. Mike always made sure that I was happy, secure, and had everything I needed. He even paid for my tuition fees. I'll be forever grateful. I had to think carefully about introducing Mike to my family, as I don't have any relatives in Woodland, Singapore. However, I managed to do this via Skype, which was really helpful. After a year, Mike proposed and I said yes, but I had my terms and conditions. He was a bit confused when I said that I had terms and conditions, but he listened to me. I actually regret even starting to address my desires to him because I didn't like the outcome. I ended up driving the love of my life away because of my greed and desires. I won't lie, I needed what I needed in a relationship. I was still young, so I needed to explore some things. After years of dating, we decided to tie the knot. I was the happiest woman ever. But then, months went by, and I was starting to feel a little bored. Especially when my husband is always away on his golfing trips. He's part of the Golf Nation tournament, so I always get tempted to go out. I wanted to have some fun before I reached my 30 seconds. I used to go clubbing and do crazy things, but I always managed to resist the temptation to go out. I would discipline myself. My temptation was just a thought, but there was a time when my husband left for a golfing trip. I could resist the urge of going out with my friends from college. I saw that as the perfect opportunity to break free from the monotony of my married life and have a little fun. So I started by cleaning the house and I needed to do some grocery shopping. But as the day went on, I found myself feeling more and more restless. I felt the urge to let loose a little. I needed to open my relationship with Mike, but I didn't know how or where to start. I wasn't sure how he'd react, and I was worried about what he'd say. I had lots of what-ifs in my head, but I knew I needed to tell him about my desires. After thinking it over, I decided to call Prudence, who I was working with. She's a 29-year-old female named Prudence. We were attending the same university. We were both at the same university, and Prudence had introduced me to the manager of the restaurant and catering company I was working in. We got along so well that I called her and asked her to join me on a date. She agreed, and told me that she wanted to introduce me to a new restaurant in a cool spot that had recently opened not far from where we worked. We agreed to meet in town so that she would take me to that new spot. I didn't realize that Prudence actually wanted to take me to the club. I didn't ask any questions because I trusted her. Prudence and I were sure she wouldn't take me to a place that would harm me or get me into trouble with my husband. I really thought we were just going to eat and have a few drinks, then part ways before sunset. But that wasn't the case with Prudence. After meeting for lunch, we decided to have a few drinks while I told her about my desires and how my husband had been absent lately. We enjoyed the music and the vibe, had a couple of drinks, and then two guys came to us and asked us to join them. Prudence was very forward. She accepted one of the guys' requests to join them when things got hectic. One of the guys approached me and started giving me compliments. He was very charming and a bit handsome, probably around 25. Prudence then suddenly said, "Let's move the party." I wish you hadn't said that, but I couldn't have predicted what was about to happen. I wanted to refuse, but at some point, I didn't want to leave Prudence with guys we'd only just met, so I stayed and obeyed. I know that was a stupid move for me because I was married, but at the time, I'd put my marriage life to one side and gone with the flow. We went to the Orchid Country Club Hotel, which was about 5 kilometers from the restaurant. As we were there drinking with the guys, I started to notice that there were 2 of us and 2 of them. That meant everyone had a partner. I started feeling a little uneasy, as I was the only married person there, and they were all so relaxed. I have to admit, those guys were great company. The guy who was chatting to me came over as I was admiring the view outside. He introduced himself as Gary Lawrence, 25 or 6, I'm not sure. He had a way of making me feel comfortable. Well, this is when I realized I needed to loosen up a bit as I was feeling a bit guilty. We started chatting about life and conspiracy theories, and we realized we had something in common. Drinks kept on coming, the music kept on playing, and our conversation kept getting deeper. I found myself drawn to his charming smile and kind eyes. It was just what we needed. We fell asleep on the couch, cuddling. I was grateful that nothing happened to us at first. I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement that nothing had happened, and I had an opportunity to let loose. I'd never done anything like that before, and I wasn't sure if I could ever. I told myself I should forgive myself, but nothing happened, so why feel guilty? As the day went on, I found myself losing myself in the moment, and the guilt began to fade away. Our trip came to an end, and I knew I had to go back to my boring house. My husband was coming back, so I had to go when I got home and found my husband was already back, which was a surprise. I hadn't expected him to be back earlier, as I'd also tried to get back earlier than him. Well, it seems he beat the traffic. He asked where I was coming from, so I told him I'd gone to a night away with the girls, but I left. I'll get to the guys' part in a minute, but first I have to tell you about my weekends with my husband. Sometimes we'd spend them together, but it wasn't fun, because he'd always be watching golf, and I'd be reading a book, which was boring for me. My mind was on the trip. I had been feeling a bit neglected by my husband for quite some time. Even though he was around, he was always busy with work, and never seemed to have time for me. I felt like I was just a bit of an obligation to him, rather than a partner he really cared about. I won't lie and say the girls' night out was anything special. It was actually really fun. I enjoyed every moment of it and wish I could go back to that night. My husband was too busy with work and golf to join me. I'm not a fan of golf. It just goes to show that it's a game for rich people. One day, a guy from the trip texted me on Instagram. I was pretty surprised, but I didn't ask him why he was texting me. I just replied to his messages, which were actually a great way to pass the time because I was bored at home. He'd asked me to go to his friend's party. But I was a bit unsure at first because I didn't know what I'd tell my husband. In the end, though, I decided to go because I really needed to get some air and let loose a little. I'd been cooped up in the house for way too long, and I'd been itching to let loose and have some fun. It was fun, but I didn't want to do anything that would affect our marriage, so that weekend was a great chance for me to let loose a little as soon as my husband was gone. I decided to make the most of the situation. I put on my favorite dress, did my hair and makeup, and waited for Harold to come and get me. When we got there, I could tell that it was going to be a great night. There were so many people, and I could see that some of them were friends and maybe colleagues. I spotted some of his friends that I had met during the night. They were with their partners, who were very friendly and full of fun. The music was blasting, and everyone was having a great time. Everyone was having a great time, minding their own business, and that was exactly what I needed. It felt so freeing to just be myself, without worrying about what my husband would think the next day. I woke up feeling a bit hungover and regretful. I had a bit too much to drink the night before. And I was worried that my husband. I looked in the mirror and saw a confident, carefree version of myself. I realized that I didn't need to be perfect all the time, and that it was okay to let loose and have fun over the next few days. I continued to explore my newfound freedom whenever my husband was away. I was either at work or playing golf with Gary. He made me feel alive, and he also introduced me to new clubs and woodlands. I knew then that I had found my real self. I had finally found the person I had always wanted to be. My friend Prudence and I would go out. She respected my husband, so they didn't want to upset him. My friends treat Mike like he's God or something. Sometimes I thought she was fooling him or me to think that she respected my marriage. One happy morning while I woke up happy and in a great mood that weekend, Simon and I had a great night together the previous night, and I woke up early to make breakfast for my husband so we could get ready for the day and go out together to treat ourselves and try to bring back the spark we had before. I was married and I'd planned everything. I was really happy that I was going to spend time with my husband after a long time of him always going out. So that morning he came down the stairs wearing his golfing clothes and came down with his kit. I didn't understand why he was wearing that, so I asked him why he was wearing his. He was wearing golfing clothes even though we had plans for the day. He gave me a really bad excuse. His golf buddies had texted him about a game that was taking place on the same day as our plans. I was really annoyed with him, but I was also annoyed with myself for thinking that Mike was actually going to choose me over his golfing games, or his friends. I mean, why would someone promise to spend time with you and even reassure you that the day was only for you two, and that you would switch off your phones so that you wouldn't get any disturbances? But then his phone went off, and he got a message from his friend about a game that was happening just as we'd planned something else. He'd promised me he'd be free for lunch and dinner later on, so I was hoping Mike would be back and we could carry on with our day. We'd planned, so I decided to cook all of his favorite dishes for dinner. I'd really missed my husband, and I thought that time was the only perfect time to tell my husband Mike about my desires. So I prepared everything and even texted to come back home earlier. I knew that when I delivered my issue of desires, he wouldn't act like any normal person would, but I just didn't know what would happen as a result of telling him about my desires. He came back earlier, just like I had asked him to, so we ate over a light conversation. I knew it was time to tell him what I wanted. I was really hoping he'd understand why I needed what I needed, so after dinner, I asked to speak to him before he went to bed. I told him I really wanted to grow old with him and start a family. I told him and reassured him that what I was about to tell him didn't mean that I didn't want to say anything that would change the way we were with each other. I didn't literally say anything. I was a bit nervous, but I was also determined. I love you more than I can say. Mike, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. His eyes softened, and a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Lips. I feel the same way, Ronnie. That's how he would call my name. You're my everything. I then took a deep breath, gathering my courage. But I also felt like there's a part of me that's restless, craving something more. I want to experience new things, but I don't want to lose you. I want an open relationship. Mike's expression showed surprise and uncertainty. I nodded, my heart pounding. I want us to be honest and communicate openly about our desires and needs. I still want you in my life, Mike, but I need the freedom to grow and discover who I am. I was outside of our relationship, and there was a long silence between us. I realized that what I had said had made things difficult for me. Mike just went on a quiet mode. Finally he spoke, but his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do that, Ronnie. I thought we were meant to be together. Just us against the Veronica's tears welled up in my eyes as she reached for Mike's hand. It was harder than I had anticipated. Please, Mike, this doesn't change how much I love you, but I need this. I need to explore this part of myself. Mike roughly withdrew his hand, his gaze distant. I need some time to think, Veronica. I can't promise anything. I knew that our relationship was on shaky ground, so I had to brace myself for anything from Mike. I first told him that I wanted us to explore new opportunities, and I suggested that we open our relationship to any possibilities that might come with that. He calmly asked why. I wanted to open our relationship, and I knew that when he was that calm, it meant only one thing: he was angry, and I should expect him to do or say anything because of his anger. I told him that I was ready to start a family, and that I was ready to give him the child he had always wanted. I basically told him that if he agreed to open our relationship, we would start planning for a child. I told him all about my desires and what could help our marriage. Our marriage was already in a bad place, so I had to find a solution. I needed to find a solution that would help us. After that, he didn't want to hear anything. He suspected that I had been cheating on him and assumed that since I wanted us to open our marriage or relationship, I was already cheating on him. I tried explaining everything in detail to him, but he just didn't want to hear it. He ended up calling me names and saying that if he ever found out that I'd cheated on him, he'd make sure I suffered for the rest of my life. I just didn't understand why he was suddenly angry for addressing the underlying problem we were facing. I told him about my desires, and we had a very heated argument. We had a pretty heated argument that ended with us going to bed angry at each other. I thought he was being unfair and inconsiderate of my needs, but I couldn't tell because he was already enraged and ready to attack. I gave him some space to at least digest what I had just told him, hoping that he would wake up the following day feeling better and ready for a civil conversation like adults and married couples. The next day was better, and we agreed to have a civil conversation like adults and married couples. However, when he woke up early and prepared for work, I tried to start a conversation with him, but he wasn't interested. He didn't even eat his breakfast that I had made for him. I really thought that I felt like Mike was being childish and inconsiderate. I mean, why would I stay in an unhappy marriage? Or maybe let me not say unhappy, but unsatisfied marriage. while I knew that I had to address the issue with my partner. I actually respected him enough to cheat and open my marriage or relationship without his permission. On that day, I decided to just go out for a bit to get some fresh air. I figured that by later, Mike would be back from work and calm so we could continue our conversation. Mike was back from work, and he came into the living room looking like he was ready to kill. His face and body language were full of anger. I couldn't even think. I think he'd found out about my affair, because he looked at me with eyes full of rage, hurt, and disappointment. He asked to speak with me on the side, without thinking about what would have made him so angry. I followed him to our bedroom, and when we got there, he threw a phone at me. I was confused about why he'd done that. He threw a phone at me, so I looked at him, hoping to get the answer I had been asking myself. Instead, he told me to press play on the video that was posted on Twitter. I did as he said without thinking, because I wanted to see what had made my husband angry. When I pressed play, I got the shock of my life. I was in for a shock. Harold had posted a video of him and me making out at his friend's house. Even worse, it was trending. I was trembling and shaking. I was lost for words. I couldn't even utter an apology because I didn't know what was happening. I had thought that nothing had happened between Gary and me, so I had no idea why the video was trending. I was really confused. I don't remember anything. Mike was really upset and asked if that was why I wanted to open our marriage so I could do those nasty things. My heart was beating really fast, like I was having a panic attack or a minor heart attack. What made my blood rush like that? I didn't remember anything, and I couldn't believe someone would post such a video on social media. I felt my reputation, dignity, and image were being ruined. I didn't know how to react, so I went to the park to unwind and calm down. After spending about 4 or 5 hours in the park trying to process the video that was trending, and the fact that I didn't remember anything, I needed to find out who leaked it. The revelations were pretty shocking. I got home, and Mike wasn't there. I called his name and tried to call him, but there was no answer. His phone was suddenly off, taking me straight to voicemail. I left him a lot of messages, including voice and text messages. He actually left me a letter saying that I was really scared because I didn't know what he was referring to and what he would do. It's best not to trust an angry lion because it can bite you roughly to a point that you would eventually find yourself useless and want to end things. Mike just disappeared. He left Woodlands without a word, leaving me with a bunch of unanswered questions and a lot of broken dreams. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but there was still no sign of him. I searched every corner of our small town, hoping for a glimpse of his familiar face, but he was still nowhere to be seen. I tried calling again, but it was the same old story. My mind was racing and my heart was pounding so much I felt myself suffocating, but I knew that I had to find Mike first so that I could explain to him what had happened. The following night I tried tracking his phone using my computer because we had an agreement to track each other's whereabouts using either our phones or car trackers. When I checked, I found out that his phone was off, and his car was actually in the garage. 2 weeks later, I had even given up on looking for Mike. I was worried about him, to be honest. He'd left without saying anything, besides the threatening letter he'd left. So I went to the shops and bought some house essentials and groceries. I was putting things in a trolley when I bumped into Gary. I got really angry and confronted him about the video he showed me was of his friend, who'd had help from his new girlfriend, Prudence. I was really surprised. I'd thought that Prudence was on my side, but it seems she wasn't. Another thing that worried me was that I knew that Mike's sister had seen the video, and I was pretty sure the parents knew too. I had already damaged the relationship I had with Mike's parents, so I decided to go to Mike's house to look for him and apologize for the heartache I had caused the family and the shame I had caused my husband. I wasn't sure what I'd say to Mike's sister, so I just apologized to the parents. Unfortunately, when I got there, Mike wasn't home. His mother told me he hadn't been at home for a month, so they didn't know where he'd gone. I was really worried about Mike and felt guilty about what had happened. A week later, I got a notification that someone had withdrawn money from my offshore and life savings accounts. I didn't even notice my cards were gone at the time. I panicked and thought I was being scammed. That wasn't all. A big truck came and repossessed the cars that were in the garage, including mine and Mike's. I asked why they were taking the cars, and was told that they had been reported as stolen and that the owners were no longer getting paid. I was really surprised. I tried calling Mike again, but it was still not going through. I kept going until I finally gave up. I went straight into a depressive state and thought I was going to lose myself. After the cars were gone, I received divorce papers stating that the owner of the house wanted me gone within 2 days. My health was not improving, and I felt like I had no hope. It was just too much. I had lost the only person who had shown me genuine love. I was happy in my marriage, but my greed and desires clouded all the good things that Mike had done for me. I knew that I had to think about where I was going to go because I had no relatives in Singapore, so I had to try and make a way to get there. I went back to England where luckily Mike had taught me to keep some cash in a safe place, just in case I got into trouble or something happened. I took that money and bought a plane ticket. I just couldn't stay any longer in Singapore. I had thought that I was done with everything that made me move to Singapore. I went to Singapore to study and I did, with Mike's help. I got my master's in psychology. I left Singapore with a heavy heart. I'd never thought my desires would lead me to that kind of stage in life. I lost the love of my life. He just vanished from our town. I really wanted to know where he was. I wanted to know if he was okay. That's what happened to me. I laid my heart on the line, expressing my hopes and needs. Instead of understanding or discussing it further, he chose to vanish from our town without a word. It left me questioning everything, the sincerity of his feelings, the strength of our connection. I felt a range of emotions, including hurt, confusion, and a hint of anger. But I came to see the value in being true to myself and my needs, even if it meant facing challenges. Over time, I learned to live with the pain in my heart, a bittersweet reminder of a love that was once so pure and unyielding. Even though Mike wasn't around, I held on to the memories we shared, grateful for the time we had together, however brief it may have been. I really thought Mike would understand my issues, you know. I really don't know where to start looking for Mike because I feel like I owe him an apology for the heartache that I had caused. Do you think he can forgive me and give me a chance to at least mend our relationship after what happened? I truly regret what I did to Mike. I'd really appreciate any advice you can give me. Please help me. This is a long one, but I need to get this off my chest. I guess I should start from the very beginning. It all started in Paris. Callie and I had been dating for 3 years and I finally mustered up the courage to propose. We were on a magical trip. I'd saved up for months to make this the most romantic getaway ever. The city was just as enchanting as the movies make it out to be with its golden streets, lovely cafes, and the ever-present Eiffel Tower. The day I decided to propose was surreal. The morning was slightly chilly, but the sky was painted with hues of pink and gold. We decided to have a picnic. I'd picked a spot near the Eiffel Tower where I'd got a basket full of her favorite pastries, cheeses, and a bottle of the finest French champagne. We sat there eating and laughing, and I felt this overwhelming surge of happiness. I remember thinking, this is the moment. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. I looked into CIA's sparkling eyes and asked her to marry me. Her reaction was priceless, a mix of shock, joy, and tears. She said yes, and we were both on cloud 9 as we stood up. As we stood there, the world seemed to blur around us, with only the two of us in focus. I slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it was made just for her. We took photos with the Eiffel Tower as our backdrop, our hands intertwined, showing off the shiny new ring. Afterwards, we walked along the sand, the city lights reflecting off the water, talking about our dreams and our future together. I thought this was the start of our happily ever after. How naive I was. After the dreamy Paris trip, we came back to our life in New York. Everything should have been. Given that we were still basking in the glow of our Paris trip, I was really looking forward to planning our wedding and starting our life together. But things started to change almost immediately. Callie began getting texts at odd hours. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, everyone gets texts, right? But then it became more frequent, late at night, early in the morning, and even during our dates. It was like she was glued to her phone. One evening, as we were cuddling on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed again. She grabbed it. her eyes widening slightly as she read the message. I asked who was texting her so late. She hesitated for a moment, then replied with a forced smile. "Oh, it's just a friend from work." But the way she said it sounded like she was hiding something. I tried to push away my doubts, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the more I observed, the more suspicious I became. She started taking calls in the other room, whispering so I couldn't hear. She tilted her phone away whenever I was close. The woman who she used to tell me everything about her life. But now she has a secret life of her own. One night, I couldn't help myself because she was in the shower. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. I glanced at it and saw a name I didn't recognize. The message preview said, "Can't wait to. I saw you tomorrow." I felt sick to my stomach when CIA came out of the shower. I decided to confront her about who was texting her with kissy emojis. I tried to sound calm, but my voice betrayed my anxiety. She looked taken aback. "Oh, it's just you. Joke's on me. My colleague, the workers, and I have a rather unusual sense of humor." I really wanted to believe her, but there was something in her eyes that told me there was more to the story. I let it go that night, but I knew I needed to find out what Kalia was hiding. Reddit. This is where things started to get really strange. Remember how I said everything was changing with CIA? Well, things took another turn when my stepbrother Joran decided to pay a visit out of the blue. Let me give you some background. Joran and I haven't spoken in years. There was a huge family fight when we were teenagers, and we went our separate ways. Our parents separated, and I hadn't seen or heard from him since. So you can imagine my surprise when he suddenly showed up at. I was pretty surprised when he turned up on my doorstep in New York. I didn't know what to say. He flashed me a cheeky smile and said, "Time to bury the hatchet, big bro." I let him in, as family is family. As he walked in, Kalia came out of the kitchen. As soon as their eyes met, there was a palpable tension in the room. Kalia seemed nervous, her eyes darting between me and Joran. I introduced them, trying to ease the atmosphere. "Joran, this is Kalia, my fiancé." Joran stepped closer, taking Kalia's hand. He held onto it for a second too long. The evening was filled with forced conversations, weird glances, and awkward silences. Every time I left the room, I could hear them whispering, but I couldn't quite make out the words. It felt like they had a secret, something they didn't want me to know. The more I observed, the more my gut feeling grew. The way Joran looked at her was definitely suspicious. CIA. The way she blushed and avoided eye contact made me think there was more to it than met the eye. But what could they possibly have in common, considering they just met after Jordan left? I confronted Kalia. "Did you know Joran before today?" I asked her point blank. She looked taken aback. "No, of course not. Why would you even ask that?" But her reaction seemed rehearsed, like she was ready for it. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind was racing with a million thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together, but I didn't want to believe it. Could it be? Was Joran the mysterious work friend Kalia was texting? Reddit. This part still hurts to think about, but I guess I need to let it out. After Jordan's weird visit, I was more alert. Calls, secretive behavior, Jordan's surprise appearance, it all seemed connected, but I had no solid proof. One evening, as we were preparing for a night out, I realized I'd left my phone in the bedroom. I needed to make a quick reservation at our favorite Italian place downtown. So I grabbed Kia's phone from the kitchen counter to make the call. As I was about to dial, I saw a notification pop up. It was from Joran. "Miss you last night was amazing." For months, even before our trip to Paris, there were intimate photos, secret rendezvous plans, and declarations of feelings. The woman I loved, my fiancé, was having an affair with my estranged stepbrother. As I scrolled further, I found out that they met at a work conference in Boston a year ago. Their relationship started as a friendship, but quickly turned romantic. They laughed about how clueless I was, and how easy it was to lie to me. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Kalia walked into the kitchen and saw me holding her phone. Her messages were wide open, and her face went pale. "I can explain," she stammered, but I was beyond words. I felt numb, betrayed, and devastated. I threw the phone across the room. I got up from the table and left. I needed to calm down and think about what I had just found out. The two people I trusted the most had let me down. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this, but things happen. After walking around for hours trying to think about everything, I went home. Kalia was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. The silence between us was deafening. Finally, I broke the silence. How could you, Kalia, with Jor, and of all people? How long were you planning on keeping this from me? She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, I'm so sorry. Kalate wasn't supposed to happen like this. I scoffed. Wasn't supposed to happen like this or wasn't supposed to happen? At first it all seemed innocent enough. We met at the conference and hit it off. You were always so busy with work and your friends. I felt neglected and lonely. Jen was there, and he listened. My mind was racing. I'd been working extra hours to save up for our wedding and our future. So, I take responsibility for your betrayal. She looked down, tears streaming down her face. She was crying. It's not like that. I just needed someone, and Joran was there. I never meant to hurt you. I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. So, you're saying that if I paid more attention to you, this wouldn't have happened? Kalia nodded slowly. Maybe, I don't know. Everything's so complicated. I felt like I was in a nightmare. Here was the love of my... She was making me feel guilty for her affair with my stepbrother. It was too much to bear. We were about to get married. We had plans and dreams. How could you throw it all away for a fling? I asked, voice trembling. She sobbed. I don't know, Kale. I'm so confused. I messed up. If I thought confronting CIA was hard, facing Joran was a whole different level. I knew where he was staying, so I made my way there the next morning. My heart was heavy but determined. I needed to know what was going on and I wanted answers. I knocked on his door, trying to calm my shaking hands. Joran opened it with that same sly grin, his eyes scanning me up and down as if evaluating the damage he'd caused. Well, if it isn't the heartbroken fiancé, he sneered, fighting back my anger. I shot back, cut the act, Jordan. What the hell were you thinking? She's my fiancé. He leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms. Kale was there too. Your fiancé? I did you a favor. If it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. I clenched my fists. What's that supposed to mean? Joran smirked. Kia never really loved you. If she did, she wouldn't have fallen for me so easily. I could feel the heat rising in my face. This isn't just about Kalia, Joran. It's about you and me, our family, our past. Why do this to me? He shrugged, feigning innocence. Life's funny, isn't it? Sometimes the universe throws. People who are meant to be together, like Kalia and me, sometimes end up apart. It's like what's happening with you two. I was so angry, I couldn't see straight. You're wrong if you think this is fate or destiny. It's betrayal, Joran. You've both betrayed her. Joran took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. I showed you her true colors, Kale. You should be thanking me. I stared at him, unable to fathom his audacity. You may have won this round, Joran, but remember, karma has a way of catching up. Hi, Reddit. I know what you're probably thinking. Revenge isn't the answer, and two wrongs don't make a right. But at that point, the pain and betrayal had consumed me. I couldn't think straight. All I wanted was for Joran to feel a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted on me. One evening, while drowning my sorrows in a local bar, I ran into an old friend, Marcus. As we reminisced about old times, I steered the conversation towards Joran. Marcus's face darkened, and he mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Joran was deep in debt, with a significant amount of money owed to some not-so-friendly people in the city. This was my chance. Over the next few days, I discreetly gathered information on these dangerous individuals and their operations. If Joran owed them money, maybe I could use that to my advantage. One night, after ensuring I wasn't being followed or watched, I made an anonymous call from a payphone. I let them know where Joran was, saying he was trying to leave the country without paying what he owed. I hung up before they could ask any questions. Back home, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. On the one hand, Joran would finally get what was coming to him. On the other, I was becoming just as bad as him. It was a whirlwind of emotions. The next morning, news broke about a major fight at the hotel where Joran was staying. We heard rumors that it was related to some unpaid bills, but we didn't know for sure. I felt responsible, though. What had I done? The days that followed were intense. We heard that Joran had a run-in with the people he owed money to. We heard that they gave him an ultimatum, pay up or face severe consequences, with no way to pay the cash in such short notice. Joran fled New York, becoming a fugitive in the midst of all this chaos. She started to spiral, and it turned out her job had some links to Joran. With him on the run, the company faced backlash, and she was made a scapegoat within a week. Kalia was out of a job. I saw her sometimes looking a shadow of her former self, pale, stressed and worn out. Our paths crossed at a coffee shop one day. There was no anger, no heated words, just silence and the weight of our broken relationship. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I've lost everything, Kyle. Joran's gone. I've lost my job and I've lost you. I was still hurt seeing her in such a state. It evoked a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. The tables had turned. The woman who once had everything, love, a promising career and a secret affair, was now left with nothing. It wasn't joy that I felt. Not exactly. It was more a realization of how life can change in the blink of an eye. One wrong move, one betrayal. I thought I'd seen it all, but that rainy night fate had another surprise for me. It was late, and the sound of heavy rain against my window was the only noise in my apartment. I was lost in thought when I was startled by a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Kalia, soaked from head to toe, with mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a tragic figure straight out of a noir film. She looked up, her eyes were wide and filled with remorse. She whispered, "Kyle, I'm so sorry." She was shivering from the cold and the weight of the moment. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I needed to see you to apologize. I've made a terrible mistake, Kalia. I never should have let Joran come between us." "It's not that simple," she replied. "You betrayed our trust and our love." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I regret it every single day. I thought Joran was the answer to the loneliness I felt, but he wasn't. It was always you, Kale. Only you." She stepped closer, her wet hair sticking to her face. "I'm so sorry. Please, Kale, can you ever forgive me? Can we start over?" The room felt heavy with tension. Unsaid words I remembered. Our days in Paris, the love and the promises. But I also remembered the pain. Could I ever trust her again or love her the same way? I saw Kia's pleading eyes that night, standing at the threshold of my apartment. It was the hardest moment of my life. My heart ached, wanting to comfort her and erase the pain of the past months. But another part of me held back, reminding me of the sleepless nights and the sting of betrayal. "I wish it were that easy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I wish I could forget everything and go back to how things were, but every time I looked at you, I was reminded of what happened. The trust we had was shattered." Sia's face crumpled, and she clutched the sides of my shirt. "I'll do anything, Kyle. I'll do anything to make it right. Please." I gently took her hands off me, holding them for a moment. Sometimes, wanting to make things right isn't enough. We need to accept the consequences of our actions, and move on. Her tears, rainwater mixed with her tears as she looked at me, desperation evident in her gaze. "So this is it then? We're done." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'll always have a place for you in my heart, CIA, but I can't be with someone I can't trust. I hope you find the happiness and peace you're searching for." With that, I slowly closed the door, leaving her standing in the rain. I slid to the floor, the weight of the situation crashing down on me,